In 327 BC, the Greek conqueror Alexander of Macedonia crossed the Hindu Kush, the great rampart of mountains, in his attempt to enter India. He used the Kawak Pass on the same eastern route used also by Timur and Genghis Khan. The formidable Greek army subjugated a significant part of northwestern subcontinent along the Indus Valley. But continuous warfare in an alien terrain and Alexander's lack of knowledge about its unique geography came in the way of further conquests. He had no cartographers to depend on, and uncertainty unnerved his soldiers. Indian heartland was spared the sword of one of the world's mightiest conquerors. The subcontinent of India, stretching from the Himalayas to the seas, was known in ancient Hindu sources as Bharatavarsha, or the land of Bharata, the great mythological king. The name India was applied to the country by the Greeks, a derivative of the word Hindu appearing in ancient Persian epigraphs. The geographical influence on Indian history is an integral part of most university curricula, but in recent years, geography or physiography have stopped featuring in the academic debates in Indian history. The neglect of geography is obvious in the works of modern historians and in methodologies that social scientists have used for studying the colonial period.
When we talk about influence of physical factors, one school of thought would say that this is geographical determinism, which only emphasizes on the impact of physical factors on civilization, society, or cultural development.
But there are historians who consider geography important enough in their study of history. The academic world has slowly felt the impact of their work.
The inclusion of geography in historical works or semi-historical works first started in India when the gazetteers were being written in the late 19th century, in which geography was shown as a completely separate compartment. The factors of geography, these are not shown as having any influence over historical events. History was shown separately, geography was shown separately. In the wake of nationalism in the early 20th century, the same format was followed, excepting by one or two scholars. One was H. Blockman, who wrote a book on contributions to history and geography of Bengal, in which he almost followed the gazetteers, but in some lines, sometimes he had tried to show that there were certain influences of geography on the history of Bengal. By that time, in France, the Annales school had started. The people who started the journal called Annales, Marc Bloch, Lucien Febvre, etc. And they had included not only geography, but physical geography, geology, sociology, etc., all included in history.
Some historians of ancient India have taken up the study of geographical factors. D.D. Kosambi was the first to integrate geography closely into the study of prehistory and ancient history. Romila Thapar, D.N. Jha, and Shireen Ratnagar have also woven geographical aspects into historical narratives. But the influence of geography on a wider national sense, as well as in an immediate local sense, has pervaded Indian history. But before we go into a detailed discussion of geographical influence on Indian history, let us understand India's physiography. Geographically, the subcontinent has been divided into four major physiographic regions: the northern mountains, the northern or the Indo-Gangetic plains, the Deccan Plateau region with South India, and the southern coastal plains. northern mountains include Hindu Kush, Suleiman and Kirthar range in the northwest and Himalayas in the north and northeast. The Himalayas, as viewed in this satellite picture, form an uninterrupted chain of mountains. This has given rise to the popular textbook notion of historical isolation of India by a natural wall. But this idea has also been contested from time to time.
The Himalayas had passes, the Khyber, the Bolan on the west. On the east, there have been passes between Tibet and Nepal, which were used for cultural purposes, religious, trips were made through, trade carried on through the centuries here. And on the northwest, the passes were usually used prominently by invaders who came in. You can say from the Aryans, or if there were any tribes that did come in even before the Aryans. But invasions majorly took place from these northwestern passes before the British came by the sea.
It is true that Himalayas have shielded India from the Arctic cold winds of Central Asia and Siberia, preserving the tropical nature of the country. In spite of the existence of the passes, accessibility to the Asian landmass was never easy, and according to historians, deterred large-scale invasions from the northern side. The mountains provided an intermediate border zone between India on the one side and China and Central Asia on the other. This abode of snow and celestial beings of Hindu and Buddhist pantheon was also never easily accessible. They were largely insulated from the political, social and economic life of the plains. The mountainous zones were in occasional political and military control of the empires of the north, sometimes under Ashoka, Harsha and the Mughals. But control was ceremonial rather than being effective. These stretches of Himalayan territory never came under the complete political control of any Indian entity until the coming of the British. The northern Indo-Gangetic plains have been served by big rivers and their tributaries that receive a perennial supply of water from the northern glaciers. The glaciers have changed the landscape of the northern mountains by creating deep ravines or reducing elevations, opening up meadows in high altitude. Geologically, the northern plains have been formed by the filling in of earlier seas. These rivers have been a blessing to the cultivators as they bring in fertile silt and help irrigation. But sometimes they wreak havoc by causing severe floods in the fertile Indo-Gangetic plains. The earliest human settlements originated here as established by the discovery of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. The Vedic culture that arrived with the Aryans also flourished in this region. The main rivers Indus and Ganga and their tributaries served as easy means of communication. They also became one of the main instruments of empire building by facilitating the transportation of armies. The topography of northern India was used effectively in battles, as we know from this instance from Mughal military history.
Particularly, I recall one battle, the first battle of Panipat in 1526, a battle between Babur and Ibrahim Lodi. Ibrahim was Afghan. Now, in this battle at Panipat, Jodhanath Sarkar had shown that how Babur had marshaled his forces, assembled his forces. On his left was a dry Nala. On his right was the town of Panipat, and that left the Afghans to charge straight. And there he had massed his cannons, which were being used for the first time.
The rivers sometimes served as political and cultural boundaries. A prominent example was Orissa, that lay between the Mahanadi and the Godavari rivers. The history of urbanization of North India definitely had a strong connection with rivers. Pre-industrial towns were mostly situated on riverbanks like Hastinapur, Pataliputra, and Prayag.
Nowadays, a new kind of category that has come up, the history of urbanization. And scholars have tried to show that the towns in India were always on the banks of the rivers. It is, of course, not totally correct. There are certain towns which are not. For example, Vijayanagar, one of the largest towns in medieval India, was not on the bank of the Tungabhadra river. It was quite a distance, and it was in the midst of the Rocky Mountains. But by and general, the towns were there, and towns were located on the banks of the river, excepting, for example, in Delhi, on which Professor Athar Ali had written an excellent article. He had shown that the first Delhi of the Muslims, so to speak, was on the foot of the Aravalli Mountains because they needed protection. But then when the town began to grow, the Delhi had to be shifted because there was no water in the mountain, only the rainwater that comes down. But it is too little and too less for the people, growing, burgeoning population. So therefore, the town began to move towards the Jamuna river, and it took them practically 3 centuries to come up there. And this travel of the city, due to the geographical factors, due to the influence of geography, had been shown very clearly by Athar Ali.
Studies have shown the Gangetic plains initially had dense forests. These were gradually cleared to make way for human habitation. The fact that Indus and Ganga plains were covered with monsoon forests finds support in the tigers and rhinoceros depicted on Harappan seals. These animals are now extinct from that region.
When we hear of the Indus civilization, we know that it evolved around the river Indus basin, along the river Indus basin, and they were totally dependent on the river. As a matter of fact, they even had trade by river. We have Indus seals which have boats on them. So they flourished because of the river, and finally the civilization, when you see the causes of its decay, you see it's a river. Because of the inundation in that time, even when Alexander came, 326 BC, the area was swampy, marshy, there was a lot of rain. It isn't the dry area that we see now. So it was very habitable and it was very inhospitable both. And it was this regular inundation of the Indus which finally decayed this civilization. They used to build embankments along the banks of the Indus by these burnt bricks for which they had to cut timber. And timber cutting meant deforestation. So the civilization died a natural death because of the Indus once again.
The northern plains were not uniformly fertile. The Thar desert of Rajasthan and the semi-arid region surrounding it did not allow much cultivation. But slowly, like deserts elsewhere, caravan routes originated here and were used mainly for trade. Small centers emerged, and a few of them grew to be towns. Some of them also became. The plateau region of peninsular India, also known as the Deccan, slopes gradually from west to east. Its western brink runs parallel to the Arabian Sea at an enormous height. The Krishna and the Tungabhadra rivers divide the tableland into 2 parts, the Deccan Plateau region and the deep South India, which have played somewhat different roles in history.
To an extent, you could say that the south of the Vindhyas have a different culture than north of the Vindhyas. But that could be because of, as you pointed out, not too much of frequent interaction between the people who came from the northwest. They wanted to settle in the Indian plains. Probably they didn't want to cross the Vindhyas, beyond which the Dravidian people, so to say, people are belonging to different culture, stayed, and they had their own characteristics. So the penetration level might not have been as huge or as continuous, but there were, if one one would not say that there was no connections. There were connections. So we have this movement of Saraswat Brahmins that they've also lived in the south of the Vindhyas, through in the Konkan coast. So, people have migrated, but obviously the roots of migrations are also being influenced by this, as you point out, physical barriers. Therefore, one would say that physical barriers does slow down the process of migration because distance is a factor.
The Deccan constituted a distinct and completely separate political identity of its own. The history of South India developed independently, occasionally converging with that of North India. The South Indian dynasties like Pallavas, Cholas, Chalukyas and Rashtrakutas thrived in the geographical isolation of South India. In course of time, the North came to represent the Aryan India, while South became the cradle of Dravidian culture. The central Indian mountain ranges, the Vindhyas and Satpuras, formed a physical barrier that historians say have prevented rulers from North India to completely subjugate the South. Even if they conquered these lands, it was difficult for the northern rulers to hold on to them for a long time.
See, the Turko-Afghans all, beginning with Alauddin Khilji, they did come down to the south. Even Muhammad bin Tughlaq, he came down to Daulatabad wanting a new capital there. And he actually brought lock, stock, barrel from Delhi to set up a capital, and then he found various problems which were there because of geography once again. It was, Daulatabad was impregnable, surrounded by hills on all sides, so the Mongol invaders wouldn't reach the capital city. At the same time, it was not in the heart of India. So he had to go back. Administrative problems were there. The North India was totally out of his hands. So Muhammad bin Tughlaq had to go back. Alauddin also conquered, but he did not rule over the Deccan. He made them his subsidiaries who paid him tributes annually. And a control, they would supply him with army or funds. But it was not assimilated as part of his direct empire. And Aurangzeb died, spending 25 years in the Deccan. Well, he just couldn't. He wanted to, bring the empire together, but he spent 25 years in the north, 25 years in the south, trying to subdue the Deccan sultanates. Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmednagar. And he couldn't manage because he stayed put here and the north got neglected. Then there were the northwestern tribes which started giving him, the Afridis and the Yusufzahis. These tribes were very turbulent. So, again, geography.
Conducting warfare in the Deccan was never easy for the North Indian kings, as was demonstrated by the Marathas to their Mughal adversaries.
Actually, the Marathas had used some kind of a different kind of a tactic, the guerrilla tactic, a hit and run. And there they used the geography very well. They did not have a kind of a siege train or the four van and so on and so forth. The set type piece of the Mughal army. It's very small, very light. They didn't even take their food there. And they used to go and hit and run, plunder and come back. And this they could do very easily because of the kind of a geography, physical geography that is there.
The peninsular region of India, with its eastern and western coasts, had a strong history of maritime activities. The eastern coasts, with its ports, were serving core areas like the Ganges Delta, Kalinga in the present Orissa, the deltas of Godavari and Krishna, and the Coromandel coast. These core areas were often the nuclei of kingdoms, like that of the Cholas, that had maritime ambitions and economies. The ports in the western coast were based in the core areas of Indus Delta, Saurashtra, Konkan, and Malabar. These ports also served important kingdoms of western India like that of the Maratha Peshwas in late medieval period. The eastern coast was an important route from north to south for military as well as religious movement. Rajendra Chola came all the way up to Bengal along the eastern coastal route.
Rajendra Chola came with his army to Bengal ostensibly because he wanted to bring back with him the waters of the Ganga. So he marched from the south via the Deccan, the eastern Ghats, Orissa, Midnapur into Bengal. And he took the waters and he went back. But portions of his army, they found Bengal to be so arable and so fertile, so easy to live, they stayed back. And Rajendra Chola went back and made his new capital, which he called Gangai Kondai Cholapuram, because of this. It seemed in those days almost an insuperable feat for a South Indian ruler to go as far as Bengal and bring the waters back. On the other hand, the army, the sections of the army which he left behind, they became later the Sena rulers of Bengal.
It is the same route that was responsible for the movement of Buddhism from eastern India to South India and Sri Lanka. The ruins of Buddhist stupas along the eastern coast illustrate this point. Maritime contact between the western coast and West Asia date back to the 3rd millennium BC, with seafaring between Indus cities and Mesopotamia. The western coast has been home to a number of trading communities like Christians, Parsis, Arabs, and Jews. Another geographical formation is now considered important, the coastal islands off the coast of Kerala and Sri Lanka. These are Lakshadweep, Minicoy, and Maldives. They broke the fury of the incoming monsoons and were used as outposts for traders sailing in both directions. It is believed that along with the Himalayas, the sea contributed into making India a distinct geographical entity. Both these physical features prevented recurrent invasions and protected especially southern India and was responsible for its identity, culture, and heritage. Ironically, the European colonial powers took the sea routes to gradually establish their authority and perpetuate it for over 3 centuries.
Let's take the case of 1857. 1857 was a landlocked movement. The rebels did not come from the sea, neither they did come from the hills. They were inside. But what the English did, you would notice that the 3 ports, Calcutta, Bombay and Madras, they were never affected. And the steamship had just started a few years back. And the English could bring their troops from Burma, from Persia, from China, as well as from England very quickly through the sea. If the rebels had occupied those ports, then there would have been a problem. Therefore, the sea had played a very important role.
Delving into the history of India, one realizes the impact geography has had on it down the ages. Physiography has not only influenced social and political formations, but most significantly also shaped the identity of the people.
The importance of geography lies in the fact that I am an Indian from West Bengal and I speak a different language, I eat different food because geography has given me a riverine culture. I am fish eating and the people of Kerala too are fish eating and coconut eating because why? They are also coastal. So it is the geography of a place that makes the people who they are.
We know that a country's present is profoundly influenced by its past. What India and its people represent today may not have been possible without its unique physiography.
Hey friends, if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel and comment down below. Thank you for watching this video. Bye.